Hey guys, this is Vishnu Varma, Head of Products at Bonfy. And today I'm going to walk you through the Bonfy platform. It's a SaaS multi-tenant platform. And this demo is divided into two sections. The first section is going to be like a 4 to 5 minutes overview of the platform, walking you through the main sections. And then the second portion of the demo will be a deep dive, a technical deep dive into some of those areas. If you're not familiar with Bonfy, it is a AI data security solution, and especially for this brave new world of agentic AI and Gen AI, when data has become more ephemeral, more fragmented, Bonfy provides a multi-channel, multi-context, and multi-risk platform. So now let me give you a quick overview of the platform. So the place that I get started with, most of the time I do demos, is the connectors piece. This is where the plumbing happens. This is where you set up your connectors to your learning sources. The learning sources are the ones that Bonfire uses to get context and learn about the enterprise. And your data sources, whether data at rest, in use, or in motion, where the data is sourced, and we look at uh, that data and merge it with the learning sources to enrich it, right? The policies are, a lot of these are provided out of the box, but this is where business specific logic is defined by our customers. A lot of these are ready to go out of the box based on standards such as PCI and GDPR, certain generic analyzers, certain policies based on customer trust and all. The automation is where you would go once the policies have analyzed and the data based on the contextual intelligence that we provide through the knowledge graph. We create findings, and based on that, you would like to act on those findings through the automation engine, whether it is notifying the right teams or people, or taking remedial action in one of the connectors or through one of the connectors to, for example, revoke access or to apply sensitivity labels on those files. So that's the automation piece. The knowledge graph is where you this is the heart of the system, the brain of the system, both where we are learning about the enterprise, the identities, the customers, the partners, the organization that's dealing with the groups that exist through which identities get access to data, for analysis and such. And then switching over to once everything is in place, the plumbing is in place, the data is flowing, the contexts are flowing, the policies are in place, everything that is analyzed, every email, every document, every prompt, uh, we have a browser extension as well, which which is used to catch prompts and analyze them for sensitivity and make sure that nothing sensitive is leaving the organization. Every activity is and you can use that to gain further insight into what was learned and how the analysis was performed and what were the findings and why were those findings were there. The explainability bit is key as well. The ERM is where a little more consolidated and high level data based on identities that are interacting with the data that is being analyzed. And we connect the dots and bring in the data security part of, for example, an identity risk, right? So this is where you can go deeper into every identity, what they have been, consuming, producing, generating, and what risks have they been analyzed for. And then the dashboard is where everything comes together. And this is where you can look at the various risks, the various identities uh, based on a given time frame, the various channels, the risks that the platform has discovered in the data that it has analyzed. So that's a quick overview of Bonfy platform. And now we'll go and take a deeper dive into some of those sections. Okay, folks, so now I'm going to get into the deep dive portion of the demonstration. In this section, we'll go into some of the areas that was introduced in the introductory portion of the demonstration. And I would like to get started with the connectors. This is where an administrator of the platform, an application administrator, would go and do the plumbing, as I call it. What I mean by that. Uh, the connectors are basically uh, the conduit, the data conduit and the context conduit into the platform. So these are uh, pipelines, if I may call them that, through which Bonfy is learning about the enterprise. Uh, it is learning about the customers through the CRM system, the identities through the IAM system, or about the workforce through the HRM system, for example. And then you can also configure connectors to the actual data source, whether it's data at rest, data in motion, or data in use, right? So let me give you a detailed explanation of how these connectors are configured, what are the nuances, and which basically are different between different types of connectors, and some of the sausage that is made behind the scenes when you actually see the data getting ingested, whether through streaming data or through scanning of data at rest. So over here, I have a bunch of connectors set up in my demo system. Let me give you a quick introduction to some of these. And obviously, this is a demo system, so I have a bunch of connectors spread across the ecosystem that Bonfy supports. But if you are, for example, a Microsoft 365 shop, then you may be interested in the Microsoft specific connectors. And if your CRM is HubSpot, then you may just want to set up the HubSpot, or if you have Salesforce, then you just set up the Salesforce connector, right? So I have the SMTP server, pretty much a very standard way of consuming email service and producing data and ingesting data in the enterprise. So that's by default is supported. Bonfy has its own SMTP service. So you can, for example, and we do support two modes of email consumption and analysis. The tap mode, where Bonfy is basically looking at a copy of the email without having anything to do with the actual in path of the email. So it does analyze a copy of an email and send the analysis, which can then be reviewed. The Salesforce is our CRM system. I have set up a Slack notifier as well, which is basically notifying the right people and the right folks, groups or teams, as and when data is analyzed and findings are created. You can either notify through Slack or through email. HubSpot is one of the CRMs that we support. Slack is connector is to scan Slack data. This is different from the Slack notifier connector or notification service connector. This is the actual Slack connector, which connects to the Slack repository to look for at data, historic data. And this is a lot of enterprises or customers may have like a Salesforce production environment separate from like a sandbox environment. So you may want to first test out Bonfy against a sandbox environment and then roll it out. Uh, in a production environment, you may actually use various Bonfy OAuth applications for various scopes on different Salesforce accounts. The Entra is set up in my demo system as the main source of learning about identities and groups that may exist at an enterprise. The SharePoint is again a key portion of the Microsoft ecosystem of connectors, where we are able to pretty much scan the entire SharePoint sites, and you'll see in a minute how that is very, very easy to set up. In a couple of clicks, you're all set up to analyze pretty much all of the SharePoint sites. You may actually want to also go in and look at certain user OneDrives and such, which is also possible. Uh, Again, if you're a Google shop, then you may want to set up like a Google Drive and a Google directory, which is very similar one-on-one mapping with the Microsoft. So for the Microsoft Entra, there is the Google directory, and for SharePoint, the equivalent component is Google Drive. The browser extension has to be set up to listen to all the analysis and the prompts that are being sent by the browser extension that can get installed on the user's endpoints. It does support all the Chromium-based browsers. And then the last one over here that I have is basically the Microsoft Exchange Online, which is looking at streaming email data, using the Microsoft 365 Graph APIs. The SMTP one is just using the SMTP service, whereas this one is actually using looking at email streaming data through the Graph APIs. So now let's look at what other connectors are available. And to add a new connector, you would click on Add, and over here you can see the ones that I have already configured and the ones that are available, right? So you can see the Salesforce, HubSpot as the CRM or the notifier. You'll see a bunch of other new ones. For example, we do have support for Rapid7 and in general any syslog server that can understand that format. It's a pretty standard format. So we have the SIM connector as well, and you can set up automation uh, to uh, to export syslogs or a Rapid7 specific formatted message out to the Rapid7 SIM. We also have offerings for our own MCP server. So this is where you may want Bonfy's MCP server to support an existing MCP client server in agentic system where MCP clients can look at or have Bonfy analyze the data that is being consumed and generated by agentic AI. And the file scanner is a recent introduction, which is basically for scanning on-prem data, legacy data. A lot of customers still have a lot of on-prem data connecting through NAS and SMB, including infrastructure as a service data stores such as S3 and Azure. So that's an overview of a connector. So let me, show you how a connector is set up. So, you basically go and say that I want to add a SharePoint connector, give it a name. Because it is part of a bigger Microsoft ecosystem, you may already have set up an Entra connector, for instance, and you could just copy the credentials from that one, give the right tenant ID. So let's do this. I'll just use the connector Entra from the credentials from the existing connector ID, demo SharePoint. And then if you would like to uh, do the SharePoint analysis in addition to the enter credentials, you will also have to enter the certificate information over here to establish that trust, which is important to work with a SharePoint data repository. This is what I was talking about, where you can very easily just say all sites and drives, or you can create your own list, right? So if you're very selective, or if you want to pilot the SharePoint connector in your environment, then this is where you go. And then the key thing is the ongoing monitoring and the historical scanning monitoring. So by default, the ongoing monitoring is turned on, which is basically near real-time analysis of any new files that are being added or updated. Or, for example, access permissions are changing on a given file, then by default this is on. Or you can actually turn on historical scanning, which is what we're calling as data at rest analysis. And you can pretty much scan the entire history or go back a certain time frame to look at that data. And this is the important piece. This is where the policies are applied. This is basically telling Bonfy that for SharePoint data, I want you to look at, you as in Bonfy, to look at whether there are IT secrets present, whether there are intellectual property data that you're seeing in that data that coming from SharePoint, obviously SHI, PHI data, privacy data, PII data, uh, and we'll go and look at those policies in a bit. And once that is set up, so let me just uh, you know turn this on for all sites and drives. You can obviously, let me just not enable it because I already have one enabled. I can show you how that looks like, and then you save it, right? So once that is done, uh, your connector is set up. What is important to note is this was a connector where we went ahead and did the analysis. So this is an analysis connector. What you can also do, and this is important for the knowledge graph to work really well, is to set up a learning task as well, right? This is where you can either use the one that I just set up as a Microsoft connector, or you can define a new connector and associate a new task. So, for example, I would like to use my Entra connector, which I just set up, or a SharePoint connector or a Salesforce connector, to learn about the enterprise. So this connector, when I say it's a learning connector, it's basically you can see two modes that a connector, and only certain connectors support both the modes, learning and analysis. Some are purely analysis. For example, our email, the Microsoft 365, is a purely analysis connector, or a connector may just be a learning connector, for example, the Entra connector. So depending on the connector that you choose, uh, you may you or the mode that you choose, only the connectors that support that mode will show up. So it is basically saying that I would like Bonfy to learn from my Entra that I have already set up, and this is the piece where the data mapping comes in, right? This is where we are telling Bonfy, and we'll go after this and look at mappings as well, to look at groups from Entra, to look at users from Entra, and to what we also support is to look at the risky users and the risk analysis that Entra has already performed, and augment that information to any risk information that Bonfire already has. And then you have the option of going selective in case of learning from a learning window point of view. And once that is done, you save it. And then you can actually, so let's see, I already have an Entra connector task already configured. You go ahead and turn that on to launch, right? So as soon as you say launch, it spins jobs which are going and collecting and learning about that enterprise as Entra as a source, right? So, and over here you can actually see the number of objects that it has pulled from that particular source. So now you have the Entra and the SharePoint configured and set up. What that means is now if I go and modify a file or add a file, I will start seeing activities, right? And this is where you start seeing activities that basically are all about gaining further insight into into a connectors analysis. So that was connectors and how they're set up, learning analysis mode, and then how once that is set up, it starts getting activities based on whether it's data, streaming data or analysis data. So folks, now I'm going to dig deeper into the policies section of the Bonfy platform. This is a very key component of the platform. This is where enterprises go and set up their business logic, uh, which is then applied to enriched data coming from Bonfy and the various data sources that Bonfy has already set up, right? And so this is where you go into the policy section. And I talked about enriched data, which is important to know. And if you refer to the connector section, we had set up like learning connectors. What that did was, as for example, you turn on learning for the Entra connector, what it does is it goes and sets up identities learned uh, from the Entra connector. It looks at the way and learns about the groups that we learned uh, from from that, and we also create relationships. So we know which users are part of a group, and you can drill down and look at those users and various attributes. Why I'm referring to this is important because all of these contexts, like the identity context, the group context, the document that just came from SharePoint, all of those contexts, the email, the senders, the people that you refer in an email, all of those can be referenced from a policy. And that's an important thing to keep in mind. So, for example, a lot of these policies are available by default. And one of the key policies is the customer trust policy. So, I'm going to get a little deeper into this. So, how do you set up a policy? So, you can either take the ones that we provide out of the box, or you can define your own checks or what we call as CCLs or content checklist, right? Which basically is a container of many checks that you may have. What do I mean by a check, right? So over here, let's look at this check which came out of the box. It's basically saying that you can be mixing information. For example, if I'm writing an email and I mention an organization that is not copied on the email, and I am talking about that organization uh, and mentioning that to another organization that I'm sharing. A very simple example, but maybe I have an NDA uh, with that organization. So this is a breach of trust, right? That I have with that particular organization, which is being mentioned but not copied. So it could be about B2C, it could be about B2Bs, and there are various flavors. And this is where you'll see that the power of the language, the policy language that Bonfy supports. You can pretty much reference in a conversation, for example, the domains. Just one of the examples, the senders, the groups that that sender belongs to, and you can actually say that if that uh, identity is being referred but is not copied, then create a finding, right? So this is one way of creating a policy, which is using the language that what we call as the CCL language, which is very syntactical. So you have to become familiar with how to invoke some of these objects. Uh, but we also support templates, and I'll get into that in a little bit. What's important is that you can actually apply scopes to these policies as well. So depending on the type of content that is being analyzed, whether it's a conversation, whether it's a document, whether it's a prompt, right, from a Gen AI application, and if it is depending on the direction. So based on the scope, this policy and these conditions will be applied, right? So let's say if I am sending an email out of the organization, only then this particular check will be applied to the data in that email for analysis. If it's an email which is coming inbound, then this check will be skipped, right? So just to give you a sense of how the scopes work, and how various conditions are applied. Talking about templates, so let's say if I am looking at sensitive events, right? So these are basically leveraging AI to look at the content, the intent that is captured in the content, right? Whether it's a prompt, email, document. So, for example, if I'm looking at data, and then I look at something that is related to, for example, in this case, a cybersecurity incident, then I would like to flag it, right? And you can add various sections and conditions to this, which says that if it is leaving the organization and if it's only outbound, and if the recipient is not part of a approved list of recipients, then create a finding. You can also, for example, create a new check in the same sensitive events and use one of the templates. So obviously you can use the very rich object-oriented language that we have, or you can use a template which is way more easy to understand and consume. So you can say that, hey, I want to create like another policy based on M&A or divestiture, right? So this is or financial distress, for example, right? So these are the conditions that will then be addressed or analyzed for in this particular template. What also is key is that you can actually add some exceptions to the rules, right? So it can say that only look at data or analyze this data if this is coming from, let's say, for example, from Vishnu, right? So I can just say that, look at only if Vishnu is sending this data, then look for it. Or you can actually create a look at a broader scope, such as a group. And then you can save it, and then gets appended to the list of checks that already exist for the sensitive events CCL. I'm going to discard out of this. So this is a brief overview uh, of the policy sections. A bunch of policies are there. You can actually look at, for example, document and document permissions. So this is where, for example, you're looking at document permissions and the groups that may have certain permissions. So in this case, for example, I'm analyzing a data or coming from SharePoint, a document, for example, and I'm just looking at whether the person who's accessing this data has the right group membership. So if they are not part of the product group, and this is about pricing patterns designs, then create a finding, right? So this is something just to ensure that the right groups have the right level of access. In this case, you can actually reference the privilege with which a particular group can access SharePoint data. And you can pretty much look at various contexts. For example, in the case of and just to show you how this is done, so you can actually say, right? So, and you can reference get identities, and you can reference a permission. So you can say that people who have read, and then you can actually say that if these identities are not in a particular group, you can actually reference global properties, and I'll go into that. Then create a finding, right? I'm going to discard out of this. So that shows you the power of leveraging context, bringing data together, and creating your own, realizing your own business policies and business logics applied to the data that is being analyzed. So that concludes the policy section. And then we'll switch over to activities, which is basically looking at content, applying policies, and how findings are created. So in this section, I will be going over what we call as activities in the Bonfy platform. A quick definition of what an activity is. An activity is anything that is analyzed, whether it's an email or a document or a prompt. Uh, each analysis event is described or defined as an activity. You can see in an activity, and this is basically think of it as analysis log in the Bonfy system. You can basically create tables. By default, there is a default table, but you can, based on what you're trying to look for in this activities table, you can pretty much customize it based on what you're actually looking for in those analysis activities. So, for example, if I wanted to see, let's say, the confidence that was associated with each of the findings, then I can add that column, and it just goes ahead for the ones which have the confidence value set, which corresponds to findings being created. Then those values will exist in that column. You can see there's a bunch of columns that are available to enrich this activity table. The good thing is that each of these views, what we call them, and you can see a lot of views that I have created. So, for example, if I wanted to look at all the 365 or Microsoft channel activities which have findings, then you could just load that, and it creates a table for me, which is all about all the analysis events that have happened with the tags or the risks that were found, how many findings were created, and a brief description, the content size, and a bunch of other information that you can modify this. If you modify and you want to save that as a view, you can publish a modified version of this particular view. So let's go back to the default view, and let's look at one of the activities and drill down into what actually it entails, right? So if you click on the activities, it has a smart summary of what this particular analysis found, right, for this particular content. You can obviously look at the basic information about who the sender was for this particular email. This came from an Analyze Now event, which is maybe this person was actually testing out certain policies. But the the overview section is pretty much the same for all activities, a summary, an envelope information, timestamps, the who, the what, the when, and it also gives you a high level view of the various policies that were applied to this particular analysis. And these policies were applied, and you can actually define which policies are applied based on the connector configuration. So when you're configuring the connector, you can actually specify what policies to apply, right? And for every activity on that particular channel, represented by a connector, these uh, these policies will be applied to analyze. So going back over here, you can see uh, the various findings. So this is the customer trust policy that were applied, and we see that there was uh, customer trust breach happen in this case, supposedly, right? We create the finding, and it is up to the analyzer. So you can actually assign this to be reviewed by an analyst, and they can document their findings over here based on these findings, right? In the content tab, you can actually see the the content, and very similar to how you would look at an email, right? Who sent it? You can expand the body and look at the actual content that was analyzed. So this is basically to make sure that there's good visibility into the content just in raw format that exists, right, for that particular content. And then the findings tab is where, remember, the policies are applied to the content that was analyzed. And this is where all the findings and all the checks that were applied, and either you'll see no findings for the check that is part of the policy that analyze this particular content, or you'll see the finding that was created. The good thing is right here, right? When you click over here, you sort of like gives you explainability by actually plugging in the values of from the content, and based on the objects that it created, merging it with the data coming from the knowledge graph and the context coming from the knowledge graph, you can actually have what we call as check explainability, right? So you can pretty clearly see why this finding was created, and you can see that these conditions were marked as true, and that's why this condition was created. And you can iterate through the values of a list, right? So there were two matches, for the referenced organization. So this is a getter, we call that's a term that we use. So there's a getter for organization by the role of referred, and then that's what gives uh, the iterator the values on which it needs to iterate and create the findings. The part that is most differentiated in Bonfy, and this is important, especially in the case of the agentic world that we are living in, is being able to tie the dots, get as many contexts as possible, and completely tell the story, completely understand the intent of that particular interaction, whether it was a prompt, whether it was a document or an email. And you can see, for example, show me the entities that were linked with the knowledge graph context that we have learned from, let's say, the CRM sources or the IM sources or the HRM sources, and merge them with the data. And you can see that, we found a bunch of entities of types of identity or organization that were either with the right role, sender's role, or referred role. And this helps the user looking at the analyst looking at it as to get a sense. Obviously the policies are doing their job, but also as a human who is looking at this and analyzing this, you can get a very good picture about what this content was actually about, and who were the entities and identities that were involved. And guess what? Some of these entities tomorrow could be agents, right? Could be machine identities who are interacting with data at rest, whether in SharePoint and such, right? So this is important uh, to know that with insights you can pretty much get a very strong sense of what the intent behind this content was. The log is basically information about more rich information about the various steps involved in analyzing this data, and looking at what action automation was done, right? So we do have a bunch of actions. So, for example, notification was sent to Slack through email. And also, for example, if you are analyzing, let's say, looking at SharePoint data, right? So securing the Microsoft ecosystem and looking at SharePoint, you can actually say that if I'm and if the customer has an E5 license with a purview as well, you can pretty much set up an automation rule which says may actually already have one set up. So this is an automation rule where it says that if uh, some sensitive data was found in a SharePoint file, for example, then you can actually put this confidential label or any custom label that you can define in Purview based on intelligence provided by Bonfy to add this action of assigning this labels. And then on the Purview side, you can you can define a rule that if this label exists, then Copilot or an agentic system may not access that data, right? So that thereby you are putting guardrails around certain sensitive data types or data stores where it's out of bounds for agentic or Gen AI applications or smart applications. So um, that's activities for you with very rich visibility into various contexts, the findings and the checks that were applied to it, and why the findings were created, and the various views that you can apply to this table, and you'll see how these views are then applied to drive the concept of our dashboards. Hey, folks, so now let's look at more visibility, right? So now your system already has the right plumbing, it has the right policies, it has been analyzing data, and now it's time for you to go and start looking at it as to who has been creating risks, where those risks are, what kinds of risks are there, what channels are producing those risks, and so on and so forth, right? So to that point, one of the key components is the entity risk management. In today's age, especially in agentic AI and Gen AI, one of the use cases is shadow AI, or for that matter, uh, any kind of use case where an entity may be at risk to the enterprise, sometimes referred to as insider risk management. So this dashboard or the entity risk management part of the product gives customers a very good, rich insight into the various entities that have been seen on the platform through their various interactions with the various data sources. Uh, so this is the table of entities who are actually risky entities. They've been deemed as risky based on their interaction with the platform. You can choose to see pretty much all entities that have been interacting with the platform. You can see that you can not only see internal entities but also external entities based on the knowledge that we have gathered in the knowledge graph and from let's say the CRM system. You can pretty much see a cross-channel view. So in this case, Vishnu, myself, has been active across two channels, the email channel as well as the SharePoint, the content type that he has been creating, document and conversation, the types of risks that he has been knowingly, unknowingly generating, and some timestamping information, right? So let's dig deeper into this particular entity. And this is what we call as a smart summary of that entity's interaction with the system based on various activities, and there are annotations. So you can pretty much go and look at these activities referenced from the smart summary, which is driving Vishnu's overall risk. This spider chart basically gives you a sense of the various weights applied to the calculation of Vishnu's overall risk or this identity's overall risk, right? So as you can see, the 50% of, and these are all configurable, 50% of the weight for this identity's risk is coming from risks from activities as seen on the Bonfire platform. We also support external risk signals. A lot of IAM systems, for example, do user behavior analytics, which is important to augment on top of the data specific risk that identities generate. And then there is this option of manually sort of updating the risk based on, let's say, the role of the identity. So if you are an executive, for example, you have way more access and privilege with which you can access sensitive data. So you can actually manually set the risk of that of the exec group, for example, in your company to be at a high level. You can see the various activities by day, by severity, and more importantly, you can see the list of activities that this identity has been dealing with. And you can obviously drill down from here into any in those activities, get a smart summary of what this activity was, which resulted in this identity turning into a risky identity. And there are various use cases that can be applied uh, to um, to the checks and the policies that are applied to these activities. So that was the one key portion is the entity risk management. The other is the dashboards, right? So over here, let me filter and apply to all channels. So you can see that, and these are all customizable dashboards. You can import, export dashboards. You can go into edit mode and, add a new chart, line graph, tables, bar chart, pie charts. So it's very customizable. The key thing to note is that all of these, if you refer to the activities part of this demonstration, these are all a graphical or chart view of the view that we created in the table format for the activities. So this is, for example, top risky users. These are the top sources, and if you go in the edit mode, you can actually see which view was applied to this particular chart. So you can see that this is coming from the all activities view. It is grouped by the source, which is the channel type that is applied. You can use aggregation for more mathematical views, such as performance times, average, latency, and such, right? More importantly, you can actually see the risks that have been discovered by the various analysis and activities that were performed. And you can drill down into those. So if I wanted to drill down into, let's say, the leakage severities, right? So I'll need to get out of the edit mode or look at Jane Dark's activities. I can go from here and look at all the activities in which that particular um, entity was involved, the various findings for those activities, and importantly, the risks that were uncovered for those particular source types. So that is giving you a very good sense of the dashboard, highly customizable, dependent on the views that are driving these dashboards. And you can pretty much look at the when aspect, the multi-channel aspect, and then the multi-context or the multi-entity aspect based on the entities. And then obviously capturing and looking at the various risks and drilling down into those risks from here. So, for example, these are all the leakage risks that have been created into the organization. So that concludes the dashboard and the visibility aspect of the platform. Thank you. Hey guys, so in this section, we'll dig deeper into the knowledge graph. The knowledge graph is where Bonfy has learned about the various aspects, the various contexts that it can learn from the various learning sources that have been configured. What I mean by that. So I'm now looking at the knowledge graph part of the product. In this, you can see that there is a schema that is available. Out of the box, you can obviously add and customize the schema based on your requirements. But more often than not, most of these existing out-of-the-box objects suffice the requirements of our customers. You can see organizations, and you can look at the various attributes of that particular object. Very, very rich, very detailed, and you'll see how then we look at the schema of the source, and then we use what is called as mappings to map what we're learning from the source to the target schema objects on the Bonfire side, right? So these are by default available. Uh, by far, the most important ones are the organization. Identities tell you about internal, external identities. Groups tell you about the various groups. A lot of enterprises rely on groups to give access and privilege to and permissions to various identities. Organization tells you about the customers, the partners, the vendors. Channel is the Slack channel information that is learned who the members of a channel are and so on and so forth, right? The mapping is where, by default, for the ecosystems, the learning ecosystem that we support, the CRM, the HubSpot, and Salesforce, the identity access management, Intra, the Slack, these are available by default, and you can drill down into them and look at how these identities have been mapped. Uh, so, for example, users on the Entra side are mapped to identities on the Bonfire side, and you can see what property on the source side maps to which property on the uh, Bonfire side. These mappings are important for two reasons. One is to make sure that you're learning the right thing and mapping it to the right attribute. More importantly, based on this, you can actually reference any of these attributes in the policies. If you refer to the policy section, these attributes become referenceable. So you can actually look at an identity and their risk and their names and the group membership, their phones, their addresses. For example, in the case of GDPR, it's important that or CCPA, it's important for you to know the address at which a particular identity resides or works so that you can then start writing policies to to check for GDPR and CCPA violations, right? So those are the key components of the knowledge graph. It is the brains of the system. It is where contexts reside. This is what is used in policies to paint the entire picture and connect all the dots. So that is knowledge graph, schema, mappings, and how they all come together to complete the story. Thank you. So, folks, that concludes the demonstration. Hope you found it useful, uh, especially the introductory quick overview, 5 to 6 minutes, and then deeper dive into any of those the key components, especially how you we started and looked at how you configure connectors, the plumbings, the learnings, the analysis, write your own policies, look at activities, determine what caused the platform to generate a finding, check explainability, looking at a smart summary, looking at insider risk data or entity risk management, and then lastly, looking at the overall picture through the dashboards, which are highly customizable. So now more than ever, you need a much more adaptive, much more intelligent, adaptive content security engine, and that is exactly what Bonfire ACS is. Thank you so much, and do follow us on LinkedIn as well.